In this video, we will talk about the intestine, our second brain, and in particular the reasons why the intestine is considered our second brain. The gut is a much more complex organ than most people realize. First of all, the gut is a digestive organ since its main function is the digestion of food, the absorption of nutrients, and the excretion of waste. But the gut is also an endocrine organ since more than 20 different types of hormones are produced in it. The gut can also be considered an immune organ since the intestinal wall houses more than 70% of the cells of the immune system. In addition, the large intestine is home to more than 10 trillion bacteria, so it can also be considered a microbial organ. And finally, the gut also contains the enteric nervous system made up of between 200 and 600 million neurons. The nervous system in humans consists of two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and spinal cord, is responsible for generating information, receiving and processing information, and storing information, and the peripheral nervous system in turn is divided into two parts, the sensory peripheral nervous system and the effector peripheral nervous system, which is mainly motor or secretory. The sensory peripheral nervous system is made up of sensory neurons that capture information from the outside through the senses such as sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch, and send this information to the brain. The effector peripheral nervous system is made up of effector neurons that receive information from the brain and send this information to different parts of the body. The effector peripheral nervous system can be somatic or voluntary, such as the one responsible for being able to flex an arm, and autonomic or involuntary, which controls involuntary movements such as the heartbeat. The autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic that controls the movements that prepare us for activity, and the parasympathetic that controls the movements that prepare us for rest. In addition, in the intestine we have the enteric nervous system, which is made up of sensory neurons that capture information from the intestine and send it to the brain, and effector neurons, both motor and secretory, that receive information from the brain and control intestinal movements and secretions. The enteric nervous system has traditionally been considered part of the peripheral nervous system. However, the fact that it shares neurotransmitters and signaling molecules with the central nervous system has led some experts to consider it an independent system. Surely, most of you have heard the term second brain, which refers to the intestine or gut, and you probably wonder why. The reason is that the enteric nervous system is located in the gut, which, as we have just mentioned, has a very high number of neurons and a certain degree of autonomy, which is why it is considered that it could act as a second brain. Regarding the number of neurons, as we have seen a moment ago, the enteric nervous system contains between 200 and 600 million neurons, a very high number, but the truth is that it is far from the 100 billion, with B, neurons that the human brain has. So it is not surprising that the human brain and not the gut is capable of performing activities as sophisticated as writing poetry or solving math problems. However, the number of neurons in the enteric nervous system is comparable to the number of neurons in the brain of a dog, which has around 500 million neurons. And with 500 million neurons, you all know that there are quite intelligent dogs. Therefore, if we base our assumption on the number of neurons, it does not seem so unreasonable to consider the intestine our second brain. In addition, the enteric nervous system can act autonomously. In mice, it has been shown that if we separate the entire gut, including the enteric nervous system, from the rest of the animal's body, the gut is able to maintain bowel movements despite being disconnected from the brain. This shows that the enteric nervous system is capable of controlling the gut autonomously and therefore supports the idea that it can function as a second brain. There are researchers who go even further and refer to the intestine as our first brain, and I imagine that again you're wondering why. The reason is that when analyzing the nervous system of animals at very early stages of evolution, such as the hydra or the starfish, it has been observed that the nervous systems of these animals, which basically consist of networks of neurons that support the digestive systems, shows many similarities to the enteric nervous system that humans have. This suggests that our enteric nervous system probably evolved from these primary nervous systems, while our central and peripheral nervous systems, which have fewer similarities to these primary nervous systems, most likely developed later from the enteric nervous system. Therefore, based on these observations, it does not seem so far-fetched to refer to the intestine as our first brain. However, regardless of whether we refer to the enteric nervous system as our first or second brain, what is really relevant from our point of view is whether we can refer to the enteric nervous system as a brain. A set of neurons per se does not constitute a brain. For neurons to form a brain, they must have a certain level of organization. In poorly evolved animals, the nervous system consists of neurons that are organized into networks. An example of an animal with this type of nervous system is the hydra. As animals evolve further, so do their nervous systems, in which neurons cluster together to form ganglia, resulting in more efficient nervous systems. An animal with this type of nervous system is the starfish. The nervous systems of animals have continued to evolve and increased in efficiency with the grouping of ganglia forming brains. Among the least evolved animals that have a brain is the leech. And what happens in the enteric nervous system? Do neurons group together to form ganglia, and do these form something similar to a brain? The enteric nervous system not only has a high number of neurons, but they are also well organized. The enteric nervous system is organized into three parts. A sensory part composed of sensory neurons that capture stimuli in the lumen of the intestine, such as the presence of food, and transmit this information to the neurons that communicate with the brain. The neurons that communicate with the brain are of two types: ascending neurons that carry information from the gut to the brain, and descending neurons that carry information from the brain to the gut, particularly to the effector neurons. And finally, the effector part formed by the effector neurons that consists also of two types: secretory neurons that control intestinal secretions, and the motor neurons, which control intestinal movements, and which in turn are divided into excitatory neurons, which induce movements, and inhibitory neurons, which inhibit them. As you can see, the neurons in the enteric nervous system are organized, but their grouping is far from forming something similar to a brain, so referring to the intestine as the brain may be exaggerating a bit. Regardless of how you decide to refer to the enteric nervous system, I hope this video has made its complexity clear to you.